Hi, everyone. Welcome to Spies and Spymasters Happy Hour. I'm Amanda Ohlke, Director of Adult Education at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C., which is in the eye of the storm. So if any of your fabulous hosts or incredible guests of honor disappear or flicker for a minute, we'll do our best to get back. But bear with us. I have not yet learned to control storms, but it is on my bucket list. Tonight, we are so excited to host Licensed to Parent Back to School with Christina and Ryan Hillsberg. My co-host this evening is Jessica Harvey. She's our Family and Youth Programs Manager at Spy.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here.
I am really excited to have Jess here because we don't get to do many programs together. So this is super wonderful. Now she's going to do the proper introduction for Christina and Ryan, though I might let them say hi.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
And now I get to do what I do best, which I am going to introduce our bar and our drink. So Hannah and I recently visited the Boardroom Bar that is in the DuPont Circle neighborhood of Washington, D.C. on Connecticut Avenue. And they did a riff on a vesper. Now, Christina, is it true that was your suggestion?
That's right. At headquarters, we often called happy hour vespers. So of course it's, a nod to James Bond.
Excellent. Well, they did a special riff on it. So Hannah captured it on film. So let's have a look at the Boardroom.
My name is Laura. I am from the Boardroom DC in DuPont Circle. Tonight we are going to make a twist on the classic James Bond cocktail, the Vesper Martini. We are making the Boardroom Vesper Martini. Components consist of a grapefruit vodka, a very botanical gin, and instead of a Lillet Blanc, we are going to do a Ohlke Americana to add a little bit of honey and citrus at the finish. To first start building your cocktail, we like to chill our martini glasses, fill it up with ice, add a little bit of sparkling or still water, and let it sit while you build your cocktail. We're gonna start with a full 1 1/4 pour of your botanical gin. We are going to do a full 1 1/4 pour of your grapefruit vodka. And we are going to do a 1/4 ounce pour of your Ohlke Americano. You're gonna add ice. And you can stir, you can shake, you can do whatever. But like James Bond said, shake and not stirred. Give it a good shake, allow those ice chips to break up and cause those chemical reactions that make cold liquor delicious. You're gonna strain it into your coupe glass, like so. And a classic Vesper Martini usually garnishes with a lemon zest, but because we're doing a little twist on it, it's gonna be a fresh grapefruit zest. If you wanna put a fresh chunk of grapefruit in there, feel free. But if you're zesting, you always smack your zest to activate the citrus flavors and the nose on it. You rim it, place it in there, and enjoy. Cheers.
It is an incredibly cute bar with they had all kinds of spy-related board games. So cheers with my water.
Cheers.
Cheers. Over to you, Jess.
Thanks, Amanda. Cheers, everyone. Yeah, as a first-time mom with a 1-year-old, I can tell you guys that my happy hours are few and far in between. So I jumped at the chance to be here with the adult team and to talk with Christina and Ryan Hillsberg. Christina and Ryan have both had extensive careers at the Central Intelligence Agency for over 20 years, Christina worked as an analyst and had the opportunity towards the end of her career at the CIA to work in the Directorate of Operations, where she met Operations Officer Ryan. Both have won numerous CIA Exceptional Performance Awards and speak several languages. Christina and Ryan, welcome. Can you guys both share more about your backgrounds and a little bit about how you ended up working at the CIA?
Sure. Well, first off, thanks so much for having us. We've been really looking forward to this event. And yeah, like Jessica just said, I was an analyst at the CIA for the bulk of my career. And I ended up there really by accident more than any sort of careful planning. I studied linguistics, African studies, and Swahili. And I also speak a little Zulu that I studied at Indiana University. And I'd planned on going humanitarian aid route. I actually had an interview with the Peace Corps and the CIA during the same week and just had a really amazing experience in the CIA interview. Did not know it was a CIA recruiter. He had actually come onto my campus and was interested in people with foreign language skills. And so I found out sitting across the table from him in an interview I had done very little preparing for, who he was and what the job was. And I was immediately just intrigued. And he had told me that I would have this opportunity to use my African expertise, my African language skills, that I would, be able to inform US policymakers, travel back and forth to Africa and work at headquarters as well. And I knew it was something I wanted to do. And so I went that route and I didn't look back. And I was thankful to have a very quick security clearance process, which is really uncommon. And so about 4 months later, I was already in the door working at the CIA in my early 20s and started what was a complete whirlwind career and loved the analytics side. But towards the end of my career, had an opportunity to work alongside my colleagues in the Directorate of Operations, the DO, which is where Ryan was, and had a really fantastic time collecting foreign intelligence from assets in the field and just being a part of a different part of the intelligence cycle. And I loved both of them. Ryan likes to say that if we stayed, I would have probably transitioned to the DO permanently, but I feel like I'm really an analyst at heart, and we can talk more about that, what that means. And, we did both leave for personal family reasons back in 2015. And I've spent some time in the private sector and doing some other things kind of related to CIA. And now I'm a writer full time and a mom of 5. And I'll let Ryan give his background.
Yeah, so like you guys noted, I was an operations officer in the DO, and really being in the agency was something I had always wanted to do. I mean, I think since I was a little boy, I either wanted to be James Bond or Indiana Jones, right? All those movies just sort of spoke to me as a kid. But I think more than that, I wanted and had growing up a desire to serve. My dad was in the Army. My grandfather was in the Army. And especially after 9/11 happened when I was in college, I really had some real strong desire to serve in some way, shape, or form in capacity for the U.S. government. And so I was looking at the military. I also looked at, I applied actually everywhere. So CIA, Secret Service, ATF, DEA, U.S. Marshals, ATF, et cetera, et cetera. And the agency was my number one choice. And the first 2 agencies I heard back from were CIA and Secret Service. And so I just went for it. And this was my junior year of college that I applied. And it took me about 16 months or so. But by the time I graduated college, I entered the clandestine service trainee program and was the first job I had straight out of college. And so again, spent almost 13 years at the agency, mostly overseas, and loved the job, loved the career. I could have kept doing it for a few more decades at least. But as Christina noted, some family reasons, we both decided to exit, but it's still something that we miss, we talk about, and really love to this day. It was a joy serving.
Well, it's so interesting. Jess has done a great job. She has the book behind her, but never fear. I have the book right here with me. And one of the things that's so interesting is the way both your voices are represented, and both of you are sharing stories from your careers. And I love Ryan's files, but I have to say, when I was reading it, I was texting Jess and I said, oh my gosh, did they run this through the publications review board at the CIA? And that is something that anybody who is listening to our programs will want to know, because I felt like I didn't know that folks who had worked at CIA were able to say the farm. Is that new? Tell us how you got clearance to share all the goods that have come across in this book.
So we did go through the publication review board, and we actually had a really smooth and positive experience with them. And, we wrote what we thought would be okay. Of course, there were a couple areas where we pushed the limits and thought maybe this could squeak through. So they did have some redactions, of course, but we were pleasantly surprised with the amount that they let us share. I think that's an important part when you're trying to share, this story, because the book, it's a parenting book, but it's also a memoir of our careers at the CIA. And we get into a lot of detail about tradecraft and how the CIA trains and why it does things the way it does. And yeah, we were really pleased with what they allowed us to keep in.
I gotta ask one follow-up. Sorry, Jess. What did you get in that you can't believe you got in? Is there one thing in particular? Sorry.
I think we do talk about, I don't know if it's in Consider the Source. We talk about the way that CIA takes care of its assets over time and tracking people down and paying them, and how sometimes people aren't paid while they're, currently, an active case. And so sometimes they'll pass away, and the agency will actually go to great lengths to find next of kin and pay them. And oftentimes that family didn't even know that that person, was an asset of the CIA. More often than not, they didn't know. And we've always thought that that was a really great illustration of the trust and loyalty and how CIA takes care of its assets. And so we were really happy that we were able to include that, and surprised as well. And I made like a little jab at how, other countries aren't so great at taking care of their assets. And so there is kind of a little bit of a thing in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's good for business. At the end of the day, it's all about the relationship and that trust and that loyalty. And it extends beyond, the current case that's going on, even afterwards. We care about these people and want to do right by them.
Well, I can say I loved all the tradecraft that you guys mentioned in your book. But one of the things that surprised me, Christina, is that in the beginning, you kind of mentioned in your early dating life, you kind of ignored that data-driven side of your brain. And I was wondering, was that true when you met Ryan, or did you use some of your analytical techniques to kind of scope him out, especially once you found out that he was a single dad?
Yeah, I think by the time I had met Ryan, since I had sworn off dating any more ops officers, and I had really kind of settled in and reached a point in my life where I felt really confident and secure where I was in my career and was really focused. And, those deeply rooted desires to have that, early family that I had grown up thinking I would have, even by the time I finished college, all of that kind of started to fade away. And I was really career focused. And they say that's when you find the one, when you stop looking, there's that cheesy cliche. So I do think that when we met, I was just in a completely different place than I was kind of in those years leading up to him, and those really fun stories that I tell at the beginning that, sorry, mom, sorry, dad. But, definitely, I think I had more of an analytic approach to meeting him for sure.
So Jess has confided that she is the mother of this darling young child. I'm the mother of a college freshman who's off to school. So we'll get to that later, but that's why we're tackling this as moms on different ends. But I also have a background area that Jess doesn't have in terms of being divorced and being a single mom and dating. And I wanted to know, Ryan, as you're bringing what did you think about bringing a spy into your family? You're in the industry, but how was that? Did that complicate or make it easier to blend these families together?
So
or blend this woman into the family? That's what you did.
Yeah, I mean, most people that are familiar at all with the agency understand it's a very incestuous organization, right? There's a lot of tandem couples out there. And so that's something that, I was never afraid of or shied away from. But being a single dad and having 3 kids, I was very, very hesitant to introduce my kids to anyone. And in fact, I did date someone before Christina for several months.
What? Just kidding. I'm just kidding. I know.
And I never, it was probably 7 or 8 months. I never once introduced her to the kids because I just didn't feel like it was right. I didn't have that trust. We had, me and my 3 kids, we had a good thing going at the time. And it didn't feel right. After Christina and I had dated for several weeks, I knew, like, I want to introduce her to the kids. I want the kids to know her. I want her to know them and to see us and how we interact and how, this could potentially be, a family moving forward. And so I had no hesitation doing that with her, but definitely it was a concern previously.
And I think it was made easier just by nature of the fact that we were both working at the agency, and we actually, we met on a field tour. And so we were in constant communication all day long. And even before we were married, we got to run a case together because even though I was working with the DO, I was still technically an analyst. And so if there was a case where the asset, had intelligence that was like my expertise, corresponded with my expertise, then I could go with him. And so we had some cases that we ran together, and we just love working together. And that was also extra time that we had, because a lot of our time outside of work was spent with the kids. And so the fact that we worked together, not only did we understand that world because we were both living in it, but we had access to each other virtually all day long. And thankfully we don't get sick of each other. So, so that was really enjoyable. And that was one of the great things about this book too, is that it was an opportunity for us to work together again, because we worked at CIA together, and then we were both at Amazon together after that for a period of time. And now we got to work on this book together. And so it's really been, and of course we get to parent together in life. So we get a lot of quality time.
One question that I had, as a blended family reading your book, I know you referred to your kids as the bigs and the littles. Can you explain a little bit to us about what those names mean exactly in your family?
So we actually have both of those ages too, the bookends of both of the two of you. So our oldest is actually a freshman in college right now, just sent her off. So we've been kind of dealing with, I don't even want to say empty nest because we still have 4 kids at home, but it's amazing the difference of one child leaving, how much it can really change the dynamic and feel a little bit emptier. So we've really been missing her. And then that goes all the way down to age 3. And so there is an age gap. So we have our youngest 3 and almost 5, and then we have an age gap all the way up to 15. And so we were kind of trying to think of names, when the littles were born. How can we can't say Hannah, Hunter, Lena every time we're talking about all 3 of, so it just kind of happened naturally. So when we're talking about the bigs, we're talking about our 18-year-old, 16-year-old, and 15-year-old. And then of course we have the 3 and 4-year-old. But as they get older, the littles, they don't necessarily like being called little because, they're told that they're big kids. So I don't know how much longer this will work, but it's made it easier when talking about our family for sure.
I was so intrigued and wondered how many countries, now that we know who the bigs are, how many were they in country with you, Ryan? Can you say if they were with you or were they elsewhere when you were stationed abroad?
Yeah, they were with me on several PCS tours. And so, they grew up, overseas in different cultures, and then not just in a specific culture, but a lot of the places where we lived, other countries were an hour away, 2 hours away, 3 hours away. And so we did a lot of traveling. And so that's something still that's sort of stuck with the bigs, sort of that desire to travel and to learn about new places and to go places. Like our oldest Hannah, she wants to travel. She wants to find a job that, can really get her out there into the world and connect with, again, languages, cultures, and different countries. And so I think it's really good and positive for kids to get exposed like that to other environments, especially outside the US, just to see, what it's like. I think it's invaluable. And if anyone has an opportunity to do that with your children, I think it's very important.
Did they do any of them? Did they pick up any languages or retain any languages?
Yeah, they did. Our Hannah, for sure, she went to some international schools and did speak some other languages. one other language specifically that she got decent at. She did continue to study it, later on in life as well. But they were never able to get, I mean, most CI officers, if you're PCS overseas, you're in different locations for 2 years, maybe 3 years at the most. And so it's hard for a lot of kids to actually master a language. Now, if they're younger, and you're there for an extended period of time, or multiple countries that speak the same languages, and like you're able to double back, I think that's a little bit easier. But in terms of being fluent, unfortunately, no, they were unable to do that.
I was wondering, since you guys are now based in the US, how are you instilling this sort of curiosity about the world with your littles?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it's something that we talk about all the time because it is so important to us. And, there are a couple different things that we try to do and things that we're considering doing. Of course, we've looked at immersion programs for the littles as far as schools, as they're starting school. That's something that, languages are something that we're both really passionate about. And we both wish that we had learned as children and we didn't. So we've been talking a lot about that. But one fun thing that we do that I would really recommend for other parents is we like to try international foods, like really unique things from different countries as a family. So we do it through a subscription box called Universal Yums, but you don't have to do that. You can just go to Costco or your local grocery store. There's usually an international foods aisle, and pick like some really unique things. And we do it as a night. And so we get the box, and whatever country it is, we look at the map. It always comes with some really great trivia. But again, you can print off your own trivia online, and color sheets for that country. And so we do like a whole thing, and it's really fun for all of us. We sit around the table, and it can be adapted to all ages. And it's just, especially with the pandemic, it's been a way to kind of talk about different parts of the world at a time when we can't travel, and to experience that. And it's also a great way with little kids, especially who are picky with food. The rule is you have to try everything in the box.
Yep.
Even the egg flavored potato chips. If you want to get that chocolate truffle at the end, you can't skip on like the really unique things that maybe don't sound so great. And so we go around, and even the littles have to taste every single thing. And I'll do a coloring sheet, of the flag of the country. We'll talk about what languages are spoken there. And again, this is something that's easily creatable with just something from your local grocery store. You can pick, an item from a part of the world that you're interested in. And that's just a really fun way that we do it every month. And we've grown to love the tradition, and we started it during the pandemic, but we're really excited to travel again with the kids, once it's safe, and something we're looking forward to.
Did you share any tales with them where your ability to try new food items or blend in with the culture came in handy in your spy work?
That's great. I mean, I think we've both been in experiences overseas. That's a great question, where we've eaten things that maybe we didn't want to eat. I remember a situation where I was traveling with a manager at the agency who is several levels above me. And we were in Zanzibar, which is my absolute favorite place in the world. And someone had prepared food for us. And it was like octopus and squid and all these things. And I don't normally eat seafood, but she refused it. And we couldn't both refuse it because we were trying to be respectful of the culture. And I just remember just eating that up, and it was not my favorite thing. So it's a great skill, I think, to teach kids when they're young, because I don't know if I'm sure you've had similar.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a couple, I've had sheep's head in Iceland. It's called svith. In Europe, I attended a diplomatic reception once, and they were serving horse steak. Now, I grew up with horses. My parents still have horses. I'm not really down to eat, horse, but, I did try it. They put it on my plate, and it did infect everything else, all the other food that I had on there. But the thing that it did for me, though, is it's forever ingrained on my nasal memory. Like, I can walk several months later, probably 6 or 7 months later, same country. I was going to a convention, and I was with a big group of people, and they opened the doors, and we were going inside the building, and I stopped everybody. I'm like, guys, they're serving horse in this building. Everybody was laughing at me. There's no way they're serving horse. Sure enough, we probably walked 50 yards. It was like a circular hallway. And we get to the cafe, and the menu item for the day was steak du cheval, horse steak. So, it's,
You never know what you're going to encounter. So got to be ready to try things.
I know in the book you mentioned about sometimes the kids using some powers of persuasion to convince their siblings to maybe go for a food that they like. So how often does that actually happen in your house where maybe kids are using skills on each other like that?
I don't know, to be honest. Maybe they've gotten really, really good. I mean, the one example that we used in the book was the cheesecake story, where and maybe I can paraphrase it here real quickly, but it was an example of it was Hunter's birthday, and we were going down to my parents' house, and Hunter loves chocolate cake, and that was definitely the cake that he was going to be going for. We were going to stop at Costco to pick it up before we arrived at my parents. And so all the kids except for Hannah were listening to a movie in the car, and Hannah spoke up and she said, I don't want chocolate cake, Dad. I know if I tell Hunter to get something else, he's for sure going to get chocolate cake. And Hannah
just to spite her.
Yeah, just to spite her. Hannah was really craving cheesecake, but just knew it wasn't going to happen. So I told her, well, just, persuade him, to get it. And she's like, well, what do you mean? Like, how do I do that? And so for about 5-10 minutes, I just did like a crash course with her on, persuasion / manipulation, but more persuasion and
planting
seeds, et cetera, using key phrases, to set things up. And so one of the key phrases that I told her to use, and we were also role playing, and role playing is actually a technique that's heavily used at the farm in training. And role playing is something that we use with the kids actually on a regular basis. And so I role played with her. I played Hunter, and then she played herself. Then we switched just to get her some experience. But one of the key phrases that she had to use, and there were several, was a cold glass of milk. And so long story short, we're getting close to Costco, and Hunter, I tell him, we got to get out and get you a cake. And Hannah's like, what type of cake do you want, Hunter? And Hunter's was really craving German chocolate cake. And Hannah noted, well, I don't think Costco has German chocolate cake, but, they have normal chocolate cake, they've got vanilla cake, they've got pies, they've got cheesecake. Yeah, maybe cheesecake, like with a cold glass of milk. She went on and did her op, right, against Hunter. And so just Hunter and I went into Costco, and we go all the way to the back where the cakes are located. And there's literally a Seattle Seahawks decorated cake, chocolate, that he would have killed for any other day. He looks at it, wasn't quite sure, walks over to the cheesecake section, picks up a cheesecake, and then he turns and asks me, Dad, do you think Grandma and Grandpa have milk? And I couldn't believe it. I mean, she had executed it so well that even now, still to this day, Hunter thinks that it was his idea to choose cheesecake that day.
Which is evidence of a very well run op and persuasion. But I remember observing this, from the passenger seat and just thinking like, is he really teaching our kids this manipulation? The immediate reaction is like, I don't know about this, but really, and the way I present it in the book is that these are really useful skills to have. And there are ways to use persuasion for good, whether it's, we use another example in the book, one of our daughters convincing a coach to get her playing position back, whether it's talking to your teacher about extra credit, or even in the professional workplace as adults, persuading others to your viewpoints. There are ways to do this and ways, situations in which this is really useful. And so we think that it's a great skill to teach kids. Of course, none of these skills that we talk about in Licensed to Parent are taught in a vacuum. They all build upon each one. And so when you look at it in terms of, we're teaching persuasion, but we're also teaching trust and loyalty, right? And so that's really important as well. And so when those things are taught together, then that's even more reason for those skills to be taught, or used in a great and positive way. And of course, persuasion is so important in espionage. You're trying to convince someone to commit treason on their country, against their country to, commit espionage on your behalf. So you better be very persuasive. Otherwise, you might find yourself in a very sticky situation where you're PNG'd from a country or worse.
One of our guests wants to know if there is a spy memory or phrase that your kids are sick of hearing.
Well, probably
For
since
sure.
this book came out, for sure, they're probably sick. I don't know what, get off the X, or they're probably
I was gonna
tired of get
say-
off the X.
Yeah, I was gonna say get off the X for sure.
We remind them of that when they're, going out, or grab your neck knives. They're probably really sick of that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who has their neck knife? Where is it? Do you have it? You're not leaving unless you have it.
Or pepper spray as well.
You guys want to explain a little bit about what get off the X is and how parents can implement that?
Sure. I mean, I'll start. So get off the X is a phrase that's taught at the farm. I think it's taught in some other areas in the government as well. But it's the idea that X equals danger. And you want to get away from the X or danger as fast as you can, whatever it is. And the X can be danger can be a number of different things. The X could be a place, a location, a person, an environment, anything where danger rears its ugly head and your gut is telling you to run and to get away. In my professional career now in corporate security, active shooter training, they talk about run, hide, fight within active shooter trainings in companies and within the government. Well, there's a reason why they recommend run first. It's because running is the only thing, is really the first way and the only way for you to get away from the X. And so this concept, it's a very good sort of mental reminder and a mental note to keep in the back of your mind, because oftentimes in a high stressful environment or situation, a lot of people tend to freeze and they don't move. They're watching, they're looking, they're trying to see and understand the environment around them, when really what they should be doing initially is getting off the X and getting to safety, because the longer that you stay on that X, the more likely it is that you will be harmed.
And there are a couple different ways that we talk about how parents can implement this idea with their kids, and a couple of, of these takeaways. And one is what Ryan mentioned, listening to your gut. And there are a couple different ways that we do that and teach that skill to our kids, because it's kind of an intangible skill. We like to use movies a lot in our home. And there's a great scene in the movie Taken, if you have older kids, where the girls are leaving the airport and you can pause it. There's an exchange of glances where the one girl is giving, information about them staying at a house alone. And you can, and taking him up on his invitation. Whereas the other friend, you can see the look on her face. She's very concerned that she's giving too much information. So there's a great illustration in that movie of listening to your gut. And then for littler kids, there's a scene in Finding Nemo where Marlin and Dory swim through the trench instead of over it. And Dory had remembered that there was some reason that they shouldn't swim through the trench. Of course, it's because she has short-term memory loss and can't remember what, right? But this is a great example of listening to your gut, because had they listened to that gut, then they wouldn't have swam through all the jellyfish. And so those are just like quick little illustrations that are great examples for kids. But we also talk about the importance of listening to alarms and warning signals. Up to 90% of the evacuees from the World Trade Center on 9/11 delayed their departure, sometimes up to 30 minutes, to do things like shut down their computers, change their shoes. And so we really emphasize to our kids that they should treat all alarms and warning signals as the real thing, even if they think it might be a drill, and to respond with a sense of urgency. And next, we talk about the idea that sometimes it's acceptable to not listen to authority figures. And this can be tricky to explain, especially to younger kids who don't understand the nuance and have that maturity. And so the message will have to evolve as they get older. But the example we use in the book about this is the Korean ferry boat disaster in 2014. 304 of the 476 passengers aboard the ferry died, and many of those were secondary students. The voice over the intercom was telling people to stay in their rooms, that was a safe place to be. Now, those who didn't stay in their rooms are the ones who survived. Right. And so we have to understand, adults as well, that in emergency scenarios, just because someone's coming over an intercom and sounds authoritative, they don't necessarily know the right thing to do either. They're, sharing information based on what they know at the time. We still want to learn to think critically, which is also a huge theme throughout the book and in our careers at CIA, so that we can assess the situation. And hopefully this skill of getting off the X plays in for our kids. I think of that recent example. I mean, you guys are in DC, the shooting outside of the Nationals game. not too long ago. You look at what happened there, and there was conflicting messages. Over the intercom, they're telling people, stay put. And then on the screen, it said, leave through these exits, right? And so these situations are going to happen. So we want to make sure that people have done things like visualize their escape route and really try to assess the situation, because, when emergencies happen, there's a lot of information and we can't just blindly follow. So those are some of the tips to get off the X that we share.
Do you think, is that the most important thing that you learned at the CIA that you have taught or shared with your kids, or is it something else? And will you fight about which thing it is?
I think we'd probably disagree. And I think you can guess what I think is the most important thing, because I am a writer for a living. And one of the skills that we teach our kids is writing. And I like to say that I didn't learn how to truly write until I worked at the CIA. And I do credit the agency and the wonderful managers and training instructors at the Sherman Kent School with teaching me how to write. And, I've taken that structure and that skill and taught, our bigs how to write in that manner, because I do think it's so valuable, especially as our kids are growing up in this era of, text messaging, shortened abbreviations for everything. And, communication is so important, and writing is a skill that's going to serve you well in school, but virtually any career. And so I really think, and a lot of people don't even realize how much people at the CIA write. Of course, as an analyst, that was my bread and butter, but even as an ops officer, you're writing up your intelligence reports, you're collecting, you're writing up operational cables. There's so much writing. And when you have that skill, it's just going to make everything else a lot easier in life, because you can do it, better and more quickly. And I think it's it's not what people think of when they think of James Bond, right? Writing, but I think it's a very useful skill to have. And you'll be hard pressed to convince me that there is something that is cooler than writing for the president of the United States. Although I do lose this debate regularly in our home when our kids are debating like who had the cooler job as a spy. So, I blame Hollywood.
Christina and Ryan, as a new parent, I'm really finding that parenting is all about finding that balance between you and your partner and allowing roles to shift over time. And I was just curious, how do you guys navigate this balance, especially Christina, going from a stepmom and then having your 2 kids and eventually having all 5 kids? I can't even imagine 5 kids living with you guys in one house.
It is definitely a balancing act. But I think, one of the greatest things about Ryan that I knew right when I met him was that he was a very engaged father. And so I set very clear boundaries off the bat that I wasn't coming in and taking over parenting duties. And so that was established from the get-go. And he was such an engaged dad that, he wouldn't have ever been shirking responsibility on me anyway. But he was already doing so much. And then as I came into my role as a stepmother, I was kind of deferring to him for a while because, blended families are so complex. And I really wanted to find my footing with the bigs and develop these relationships of trust and be very attuned to the fact that my relationship with them is very different from his relationship with them. And it always will be different. And so he's often taken on the bulk of responsibilities for the bigs in terms of the logistics and the admin of the house and their school stuff and their sports. And then I naturally have fallen into kind of the cruise director for the littles and all of those things. And so there's kind of a natural, I think, division that happened. But of course, we're always, cross-pollinating with things that it's just, there's so many balls in the air. And honestly, as the bigs have gotten older, we've come to rely on them so much as well, because as a family of 7, everybody has to help, everyone has to pitch in, whether it's taking your sister, to volleyball practice, or whether it's helping the littles with bedtime, because it's important for us to get time together as well. Before the pandemic, we were actually getting a date night at least once a week, which was amazing. Having helpers here, but I'd say it's a juggling act for sure.
Oh, so Jess and I are asking a few things that came from what we lived through with our kids. So I have a teen question that might usually be in her court, but she hasn't parented a teen yet. And this came in from a good old friend of ours wanting to know if you used any of your surveillance skills working with your teen targets. Did that come in handy, being trained in surveillance?
So I think people are surprised to know that we do not surveil our kids. And go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite the opposite. I think the natural response is like, well, you must spy on your kids. Can you give us tips for what we can do? And we actually advocate for, yeah, quite the opposite, more autonomy, because we think that when there's a balance of autonomy and boundaries, and again, it comes back to that trust and loyalty, we're letting our kids experience the world and we're training them to get out there and be able to be independent. Right. And so, especially I think on technology is the big one that this comes up with teens, because people are like, how can I see my kid's phone, or how can I use a GPS to track my child and know where they are, right? And I like to say that that's not something that we do because we feel like all these other skills, like I was saying, they're not, taught or learned in a vacuum. They give our kids these capabilities and they give us a piece knowing that they're equipped to be out there and we don't need to be doing that. At the same time, we suggest that parents who do choose to do things like Life 360 or whatever type of surveillance thing, that they do tell their kids so that their kids understand that there's no expectation of privacy. Because one of the worst things that can happen is, your kids find out that you have some sort of software programmed and, you're snooping on them without them knowing. Nothing is going to erode trust faster than that. But really it comes down to, we want our kids to, one, during the pandemic, be connected to people. So we're not going to lock down their technology and not give them access to certain apps because we think it's a slippery slope. They need to learn it because they need to be connected to friends, especially when everyone's feeling isolated from COVID-19. But then also we want them to be tech savvy when they get out into the world. And so, you often see these like ends of spectrum, like no access to any apps. It's a slippery slope and I don't want my kids to see these things. But the reality is they're going to see them. They're going to see them, whether it's at school, at a friend's house, and then giving them no boundaries, and they're seeing everything. Like we really fall somewhere in between because we think that we'd rather them be exposed to things and come to us and have that relationship of trust that we can offer that guidance while they're here and help shape their experience while they're, still living with us, so that they're prepared and not fumbling their way through making mistakes. I mean, as we know, there are plenty of adults who don't necessarily know what's appropriate to post on social media. And so we want to take this as an opportunity to guide our kids so that they will make smart choices throughout their lives.
And I think I'd like to add to that too is, helping our children when they make mistakes, understand the what, the why, the how, and then how to learn from them. And I think one thing that the agency does extremely well, especially down at the farm, is learning through failure. A lot of training and a lot of the ops that you do in training are designed for you to fail. And it's through failing. I mean, there's a few mistakes I did in my training that are now forever ingrained on my brain, and I would never make those same mistakes again. And so I think failure is healthy, and it's probably one of the best ways to really learn and to develop yourself. And so being able to have, like Christina said, that trust, that strong relationship with your kids and helping them through some of those failures now, so that then when they become adults, they're successful and they're competent.
So I'm wondering, as someone who survived, and I feel that's about all I've done is survive a year and a half of virtual school so that my kid could graduate and go off to college. Did you have any key focusing tips or any way that you have dealt with, virtual school, or did you not have to deal with it, or anything that came out of your spy training that helped with that?
We did deal with virtual school for all of the kids for the past 18 months. And in fact, our two teenagers just went back to high school yesterday. Of course, wearing masks, but it's actually in person. But yeah, I mean, in one of the chapters of the book is on perfection, and perfection being the enemy of the good. And there was, when the pandemic first started and virtual classes were happening, I think we were several weeks in, and Christina actually had a really good situation happen unfold through some Facebook groups and dealing with our son Hunter.
Yeah, there were parents that were commenting in like our local school district page about the amount of time their kids were spending on their schoolwork, on their virtual schooling experience. Like I'm talking like 12, 14, 16 hours, like long days. And I'm like reading this thread and I'm thinking like, is Hunter not doing his work? There were kids in our son's grade and he was in 10th grade last year. And I'm thinking like, is he how are his
Slacking.
grades? Is he slacking because he hasn't really been doing any? Like he's been getting all of his homework for the entire week done in a couple hours on Monday. They really weren't assigning that much as far as we knew, that early in the pandemic, everyone was kind of trying to figure out what was going on. Right. And so I immediately came to Ryan and said, I think we might have a problem. Like we need to find out what's going on with Hunter if he's doing all his work and if his grades are good. And we talked to Hunter and he's like, oh yeah, I'm getting everything done. Those are just the kids who are overthinking it. And we were like, okay. And it was a great example of this concept of, teaching your kids that perfection can be the enemy of the good, knowing when good is good enough. And Hunter was getting all of his work done. He had great grades and he wasn't stressing about making it perfect and putting in that extra time. And so we were really pleased to see his experience with that.
Yeah, I mean, if he wanted to get 100% or over 100% on a test or quizzes or homework, he could have studied several more hours, but he could just do enough to get a 95 and be okay. And really that's it. It really made us happy because it's especially in training down at the farm. If you're going through training and you're doing these exercises and then you're writing everything up at night and you're trying to get everything perfect and you're up till 1, 2 in the morning to get everything perfect. Well, then you're waking up at 5 a.m. the next day. Then you're tired. Then you start making mistakes. And so knowing when good is good enough, and really perfection, that's a lot. That's a burden. That's a heavy burden to be put on your shoulders and those high of expectations. And so, it's about time management, organizational skills, getting what you can get done now, and then saving something else for later or knowing that's enough and then moving on to the next task. I mean, a lot of adults have problems, with this issue. And so understanding that and us realizing, indirectly that Hunter was basically mastering this himself, on his own, through some of our encouragement over the years and discussing this principle. It was great.
I will say though, this doesn't mean that we don't expect greatness of our kids. And I am someone, when he talks about there are some adults, I am like a perfectionist, like to a T, like I'm the one who wanted, 120% on everything. And so it's something that I think for me as a mom, and I talk about that in the book too, especially a new mom in this age of social media, where we can scroll through and see all these carefully curated images of the perfect mom and all of the perfect, activities, their pandemic preschools that they've set up. And it's just so colorful with the perfect chalkboard. And I experienced that, when last fall started, and I wasn't planning on doing any sort of preschool for the littles, because the more images I saw of these like perfect moms, the more I felt inadequate. Right. And I had to get to a point where I realized, what, like my kids don't need a perfectly curated image for Instagram. Like the bar is actually much lower. And so I sat down and thought, like, what can I do to make a magical experience for them with very minimal effort from me, with all of our kids at home. And thankfully, Ryan had just finished building this fantastic treehouse that happened to coincide with the start of the pandemic. He had just finished it. And, the bigs weren't using it for virtual schooling. And so I said, listen, I'm going to start 2 days a week doing homeschool, preschool, school in the trees with the littles. And it was really like not a thing. It was like an hour and a half tops twice a week, where we had a little routine and they felt like it was at school. And that was really all they needed. It didn't need to be this huge, perfect image. And so I think we can sometimes hold ourselves to these standards, especially as parents, especially as new moms, with all these mommy bloggers and influencer accounts. And so we just need to remind ourselves that, that's really not what our kids need. What they need is, love and attention and really building memories and creating, magic with them, whether it's in a treehouse, whether it's a fort in your living room. There are so many ways to do that for our kids. But I will say, the perfectionist tendencies, they run deep in me. I already see them in our 4-year-old. And so it's a constant battle when it comes to that for me.
I'll say, Christina, one of the things that I really appreciated when reading the book is your frankness, talking about sort of letting go of that perfectionism, and also just your frankness about having postpartum anxiety. I really feel that, what happens to women after being pregnant and, you get this little baby, not a lot of people talk about that. Kind of switching gears a little bit. A lot of your book reviews call you guys sort of the real life Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And I understand that a production company has bought the rights to your book. So can we expect Brad and Angelina to get together and play the two of you guys on TV?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. We like to say we're the movie depiction of them because I don't know that the real life story turned out well.
No.
But yeah, we sold rights for a scripted TV series to Imagine Entertainment, which is owned by Brian Grazer and Ron Howard, which has been really exciting. And it's fun to think about, who would play us in a show. But yeah, we're moving forward on that project. We can't unfortunately give many details, but we're really excited to see that come to fruition.
We do have some short lists of our faves that that we'd want to.
Which we want to hear. Can you share if you had to pick?
I mean, I really love Gal Gadot, or is it Gal Gadot? I don't know. I hope I didn't fumble that. Little Wonder Woman never hurt anyone.
I like Ryan Reynolds. We share the same birthday, and I love his humor, and I think he could actually do a pretty good job.
Oh, I can't wait. I like those two picks for you guys.
Yeah, and I love, yeah, we love those actors, and that sounds great. A guest in the audience wanted to know, besides getting off the X, they would love another tip for bigs and littles to live safely and responsibly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we talk a lot about preparing for emergency scenarios in the book, and we can start that at any age with our kids. I think sometimes, especially when I met Ryan, and I will say one of the things about the book for those who haven't read it, it really is told like a memoir and a story. And I'm kind of a proxy for the reader because you come along with me on my journey, and I'm initially skeptical of some of these things. So even though I know these principles from the CIA, when I saw Ryan doing them with kids, I had never been a parent. Ryan had been parenting for 10 years at that point. And so I had a lot of questions about some of the things he was doing. And so as you'll see in the book, I'm very transparent about what I wasn't on the same page with, what I wanted to do differently with the littles. And then I kind of explain how I've come along, what I've chosen to adopt, what we've kind of tweaked together, and how my expertise has then blended with his to make our approach. But we do talk about this idea of preparing kids for emergencies. And that initially felt really intimidating and scary to me. And I remember conversations with Ryan from the get-go of like, shouldn't we just let our kids be kids? There's so much scariness and badness in the world. Let's just shield them from that as long as we can, and he encouraged me, to see that that's actually a disservice for our kids. And there are ways to do it that make it empowering rather than intimidating. And one of the biggest ways that Ryan was doing this from the get-go, and we continue to do now, is doing this through instilling adventure in our kids. And so there are a couple different ways that we do that. And one of the things that we like to do is we introduce a go bag to the kids at a very young age, like 3 years old. And we call it an adventure bag. And we involve them in the process. We sit them down at the table. You can choose a type of bag that appeals to them.
I first used like an Indiana Jones satchel. That's what we started out with.
And then they're a part of it. You put a glow stick, a flashlight, your own Band-Aids, and you make it very exciting so that they are invested and they feel a personal responsibility. You get them to start carrying it on hikes so that if someone needs a Band-Aid, they grab theirs. They're becoming a responsible member of the family. And so that's one of the ways that we instill adventure. And I think there's just ways that Ryan, makes it fun with, we don't do like one intense week of emergency training with our kids. It's really woven throughout the way we live our lives. And it's so organic that the bigs, they've learned all these principles without even really knowing that they had learned them. Right. So we talk about, planning your alternative transportation. And so one of the things that we have in our family are motorcycles. And that's something I'm very transparent about that I was not on board with from the get-go. And I've come a long way. But the idea here is, and if you're not comfortable with motorcycles, it's perfectly fine. The idea is that have you and your family thought through what you'll do if roads are impassable. If you need to get somewhere and you can't go by car, it doesn't have to be a motorcycle. It can be a bicycle. It can be a scooter. It can be a four-wheeler, one of those Polaris, whatever those are that we were talking about the other day. there are lots of different options, depending on what your terrain is, where you are, but something to think through with your family. We also talk about motorcycles just because it's another example of making your kids well-rounded, which I think is really one of the key themes throughout the book, because it is so important for CIA operations officers to be well-rounded as they're recruiting assets and trying to build a bond, build rapport through common interests. And the more interests the operations officers have, the more likely it is that they'll be able to make connections with targets. And that's a skill that we think is so important for our kids. And so our kids do things like ride motorcycles and shoot bow and arrow. And, we view those as skills, not necessarily things that, CIA officers are out doing in the field, but skills that make our kids more interesting, more fascinating, more prepared for emergency scenarios and that sort of thing.
Besides being well-rounded, what advice would you give students, your own kids or any others who want to enter the intelligence field?
So we've met with quite a few people since we've left the agency, high school students, college students, who from one reason or another found out, who we were through family or friend, etc., and have wanted to join. And have wanted to know sort of, what should I do? What should I think about? How do I prepare for that? So this is something that we're pretty familiar with. There's actually quite a few things that you can do. One thing, languages, whether that's a language you're learning in high school or you're studying on your own, languages are so important. International travel. Again, that can be expensive. It's difficult here now during the pandemic, especially traveling internationally. But your ability and your experience of traveling and experiencing new cultures and potentially knowing languages, that's only going to help you. In addition to that, really know and try to understand for yourself what type of personality you have, because there's different types of roles in the agency that really are more suited to different types of personalities. So for example, an operations officer, you have to be able to live in the gray. Having a black and white mentality or personality, it's going to be very difficult for you to get through training at the farm. And so understanding sort of where your strengths are, etc., is also going to be invaluable. We also recommend people get a subscription to The Economist. You need to be knowing what types of current events are happening around the world, who the leaders are, what the issues are in Asia and Europe and South America and Africa. And you need to be able to speak to those things. In addition to that, I'd say read Inside the CIA by Ronald Kessler. I know that's something that the recruiting office has recommended to people going through the hiring process to read, to give you sort of a behind the scenes look into the agency. And if you've already read that, then you're ahead of the game. Separately from that, as Christina noted, become well-rounded, be personable, work on your social skills, work on those skills. So I had a university professor. I got a degree in political science and I got another degree in philosophy. And my favorite philosophy professor, Dr. Burkholder, he'd always tell us, and I took several classes from him, he'd always tell us one should know something about everything and everything about something. And I really took that to heart, and it goes to the well-roundedness that we talk in the book, but then also the importance of being well-rounded as an operations officer so that you can build those connections and rapport with people on common interests. And so whether that's taking classes, cooking classes, or you learn how to sail, it's about hobbies, really, being able to know a little bit about everything so that you can speak to it. And then that one thing that you're excellent on, that one thing that you dominate, for me, that was tradecraft, espionage, being an ops officer, and everything else sort of comes along and helps support that.
And of course, if you're an analyst, it's okay to dive deep and not be as well-rounded. If there's a part of the world that you are very interested in, like for me, it was Africa, I would encourage, folks to do that and to pursue that. And I think one of the biggest mistakes people can make is trying to anticipate what intelligence priorities are now, will be in the future. I always like to say, study what you're passionate about and what you are really interested in, because intelligence priorities change. The world changes. Yes, there are some constants. There are some countries that we're always going to be interested in, particular hard targets. But you really need to study something if you're going to choose to dive deep because you see yourself as an analyst. It really should be an area of the world that you are passionate about, because I think that is going to make it more enjoyable for you. And I think when it's more enjoyable, you will be more energetic, and then you will be more successful.
And the other thing that I would say, because this always comes up with everybody that I speak to, is the polygraph. People are so afraid of the polygraph. And I'm going to be straight up with everybody here and to give you the real truth lowdown. Because I used to run a polygraph program. I was also running a program
After the agency.
I was also running a program on Insider Threat to look at new deception detection techniques to replace the polygraph.
And this is all outside of CIA. I feel like
Yeah.
I should clarify so they know we're not breaking any
So
PRB rules.
I mean, the polygraph really hasn't changed in 90 years or 75 years, except for the computerization of it in the 90s. And really, a polygraph is only as good as the polygrapher that's giving it. It's an interrogation tool. And so, the fact that the US government is still using the polygraph as the primary means of screening incoming government employees with top secret security clearances, it's mind-blowing to me. Most spies that have been convicted of espionage, they've passed their polygraphs, right?
Because they didn't feel guilty about what they were doing.
It's not based in science, despite what a lot of polygraphers think, because it's their job, it's their bread and butter, but it's not based in science. There's a reason why it's not admissible in court. And again, it only works if you admit to something. And so people get real spun up about the polygraph and are really nervous about it. Don't sweat it. Just be truthful, get through it. Again, it's only as good as the polygrapher that's giving it, and it's more of an interrogation tool than anything else.
Or the guilt that you yourself harbor.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Christina and Ryan and my dear friend Jess. It has been so great to spend an hour, which flew by. And of course, we have additional questions, which we may share with you. There are a couple from the audience that we did not get to, but it's really been a pleasure to speak with you tonight. And please jump on our website, because we have programs for all ages, and we'd love to have you sign up. We have some heavy stuff coming up in the week of 9/11 for teacher training and also an adult program. But join us there, sign up. And if you've enjoyed tonight or any of our other programs, don't hesitate to make a donation to the International Spy Museum. We'd love to have your support, because we love spending time with you and incredible people like Christina and Ryan and Jess. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Bye, everyone.
Good night. Take care.